Hi, everyone. Welcome to Holiday Storytelling. I'm Kara, and we've got Joe and his son Vincent here as well. And we have some holiday related stories that we're going to tell you. I am going to begin with the Grimm's fairy tale, the Elves and the Shoemaker. And this is really only a Christmas story because it happens near Christmas, but we'll go with it. So I'll begin. Once there was a shoemaker who, through no fault of his own, had become so poor that he only had enough leather for one last pair of shoes. In the evening, he worked out the leather and set it on the board to work on in the morning. But when he arose the next morning, he was astonished to find the shoes already made on the board. Inspecting them closer, he saw that not a stitch was done wrong, as if they had been made for a prize. That day, a customer came in and paid so handsomely for the shoes that he was able to get enough leather for 2 more pairs. And he worked out the leather in the evening, set them on the board to work on in the next morning. And when he awoke again, he found 2 more pairs of shoes sitting on the board already made. He did not want for customers that day, who paid him so liberally for the shoes that he was able to get enough leather for 4 more pairs. And he worked out the leather in the evening once again and went to bed. And the next morning, he found there 4 perfect pairs of shoes already made up. This went on for some time, and soon the shoemaker had begun to regain his former appearance and was even becoming a prosperous man. One night, not long before Christmas, he said to his wife, "What say you we stay up and see who helps us so kindly?" She agreed and lit a match, and they went and hid themselves in one corner. When the clock struck midnight, in came 2 little elves, jumping about, and set quickly to work, their little hands stitching and sewing and hammering so swiftly and lightly that the shoemaker and his wife stood astonished the entire time until the elves were done and they flew out the door. In the morning, his wife said to him, "The little men have treated us so well and made us rich, and we should show our gratitude. I will make them shirts and coats and trousers, and you will make them each little shoes." The shoemaker agreed, and they set to work. And when all was done, they laid out the shoes on the board one night instead of the leather. And then they hid themselves to see the results. At midnight, the elves came bounding in, but then stopped in astonishment when they saw not the leather on the board, but the natty little clothes. But soon they showed their rapturous glee. They drew on their coats and smoothed them down, and then began jumping and dancing about, singing, "Smart and natty boys are we, shoemakers will no longer be." And then they went jumping and dancing over the chairs and straight out the door. They never were seen again after that evening. But the shoemaker prospered in all he undertook and lived happily to the end of his days.
Nice. Shall I read one next?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. What I've prepared is, or have printed out, is A Child's Christmas in Wales by Dylan Thomas. This is kind of special for our family. There was a video that I think was a movie that was made around 1989,
something like
where
that.
there's an older actor that probably most people would recognize, and he's telling this story to his grandson.
It's a really wonderful adaptation.
It's a wonderful adaptation, and we watched it.
It's on YouTube, I believe. So maybe we can post that in the event page.
Maybe,
but
wonderful. But it's such a wonderful story and such a wonderful memory for me because our kids grew up listening to it. So, so I've enlisted my son Vince here to be the child, and I am the older fellow who is talking about his Christmas when he was younger. And I feel this is really important because, when you're old and we have a crappy year like we had this year, you go, Christmas is like nothing, but those kids, everything they see is, it's like special to them. Just like when you were young, when I was young, and that those Christmases were special to us as well. So it's an interesting perspective that to remember that. So here's A Child's Christmas in Wales by Dylan Thomas. One Christmas was so much like the other. In those years around Seatown Corner now, out of all sound, the distant speaking of the voices, I sometimes hear a moment before sleep, then that I can never remember, whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. All the Christmases roll down towards the two-tongued sea like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stop at the rim of an ice-edged fish freezing waves, and I plunge my hands into the snow and bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into the white wool white bell-tongued ball of holidays resting at the rim of the carol singing sea, and out comes Mr. Prothero and the firemen. It was an afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden waiting for cats with her son Jim. It was snowing. It was always snowing at Christmas. December, in my memory, is white as Lapland, although there were no reindeers. But there were cats, patient, cold, and callous, our hands wrapped in socks. We waited to snowball the cats. Sleek and long as jaguars and horrible whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would slide and sidle over the white back garden walls, and the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasined trappers from Hudson Bay, off Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes. The wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen, in the muffling silence of the eternal snows, eternal ever since Wednesday, that we never heard Miss Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden. Or if we heard it at all, it was to us like a far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat. But soon the voice grew louder. "Fire!" cried Mrs. Prothero, and she beat the dinner gong. And we ran down the garden with the snowballs in our arms toward the house, and smoke indeed was pouring out of the dining room, and the gong was bombulating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin like a town crier in Pompeii. This was better than all the cats in Wales standing on the wall in a row. We bounded into the house, laden with snowballs, and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room. Something was burning all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there at midday with a newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking at the smoke with a slipper.
"A fine Christmas."
"Call the fire brigade," cried Mrs. Prothero, and she beat the gong. "They won't be here," said Mr. Prothero. "It's Christmas." There was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mrs. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving the slipper as if she was conducting, as if he was conducting. "Do something," he said, and we all threw our snowballs into the smoke. But I think we missed Mr. Prothero and ran out of the house to the telephone box. "Let's call the police as well," Jim said, "and the ambulance, and Ernie Jenkins, he likes fires." But we only called the fire brigade, and soon the fire engine came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house, and Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned it on. Nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve. And when the firemen turned off the hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Mrs. Prothero, came downstairs. Came downstairs and peered in at them. Jim and I waited very quietly to hear what she would say to them. She said the right thing always. She looked at the 3 tall firemen in their shining helmets, standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolving snowballs, and she said, "Would you like anything to read?" Years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves in Wales and birds in color of the red flannel petticoats whisked past the harp-shaped hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelt like Sunday afternoons in a damp front farmhouse parlors. We chased with the jawbones of deacons and the English and the bears before the motor car, before the wheel, before the Duchess-faced horse, when we rode the daft happy hills bareback. It snowed and it snowed, but here a small boy says,
It snowed last year too. I made a snowman and my brother knocked it down. And then I knocked my brother down. And then we had tea.
But it was not the same snow, I say. Our snow was not only shaken from whitewash buckets down from the sky, but it was shawling out of the ground and swam and drifted out into the arms and hands and bodies of the trees. Snow grew overnight on the roofs of the houses like pure and grandfather moss. Minutely ivied the walls and settled on the postman, opening the gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white, torn Christmas cards.
Were there postmen then too?
With sparkling eyes and wind-cherried noses, on spread frozen feet, they crunched up to the doors and mittened on them manfully. But all that the children could hear was the ringing of bells.
You mean that the postman went rat-a-tat-tat and the doors rang?
I mean that the bells that the children could hear were inside them.
I only hear thunder sometimes, never bells.
There were church bells too.
Inside them?
No. In the bat-black, snow-white belfries, tugged by bishops and storks, and they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam of powder and the ice cream hills, over a crackling sea. It seemed that all the churches boomed for joy under my window, and the weathercocks crew for Christmas on our fence.
Get back to the postman.
They were just ordinary postmen, fond of walking and dogs and Christmas in the snow, and they knocked on doors with blue knuckles.
Ours has got a black knocker.
And then they stood on the white welcome mat in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghosts with their breath and jogging from foot to foot like small boys wanting to get out.
And then the presents.
And then there were presents after the Christmas box, and the cold postman with a rose on his button nose tingled down the tea tray slithered run of the chilly glinting hill. He went in his icebound boots like a man on fishmonger's stabs. He wagged his bag like a frozen camel's hump, dizzily turned the corner on one foot, and by God, he was gone.
Get back to the presents.
Okay, there were useful presents, engulfing mufflers of the old coach days, and mittens that were made for giant sloths, zebra scarves of a distance like silky gum that could be tug-o-warred down to the galoshes, blinding tam-o'-shanters like patchwork tea cozies, and bunny-suited busbies and balaclavas for victims of head-shrinking tribes, and from ants who always wore wool next to their skin. There were mustached and rasping vests that made you wonder why the ants had any skin at all. And once I had a crotcheted nose bag from an ant, now, alas, no longer whinnying with us, and pictureless books in which small boys, though warned with quotations not to, would skate on Father Giles' pond and did and drowned. And the books told me everything about the wasp except why.
Go on to the useless presents.
Bags of moist, many-colored jelly babies, and a folded flag, and a false nose, and a tram conductor's cap, and a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell. Never a catapult once, by a mistake that no one could explain. A little hatchet, and a cellulite duck that made, when you pressed it, the most unduck-like sound. A mewing moo that made the ambitious cat might make who wished to be a cow, and a painting book in which I could make the grass, the trees, and the sea and the animals any color I liked, and still a dazzling sky blue sheep are grazing in the red field under the rainbow-billed and pea-green birds. Hard-boiled toffee, fudge, all sorts of crunches, crackle, humbugs, glaciers, marzipan, and butter Welsh for the Welsh. And troops in bright tin soldiers who, if they could not fight, could always run. And snakes and families and happy ladders and easy hobby games for little engineers, complete with instructions. Oh, easy for Leonardo. And a whistle to make the dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door and make him beat on the wall with his stick to shake our picture off the wall. And a packet of cigarettes when you put one in your mouth and you stood on the corner of the street and you waited for hours in vain for an old lady to scold you for smoking a cigarette. And then with a smirk, you ate it. And then it was breakfast under the balloons.
Were there uncles like in our house?
There were always uncles at Christmas, the same uncles. And on Christmas mornings, with a dog disturbing whistle and sugar fags, I would scour the Swarth town for the news of the little world and always find a dead bird by the post office or a white deserted swings, perhaps a robin, but all but one of his fires out. Men and women waiting, scooping back from the chapel with taproom noses and wind-bust cheeks, all albinos, handling their stiff black jarring feathers against the irreligious snow. Mistletoe hung from gas brackets in all the front parlors. There was sherry and walnuts and bottled beer and crackers by the desert spoons and cats in furabouts watch the fires and the high-heaped fire spat, all ready for the chestnuts and the mulling pokers. Some few large men sat in the front parlors without their collars, uncles most certainly, trying their new cigars, holding them out judiciously at arm's length, returning them to their mouths, coughing, and then holding them out again as though waiting for the explosion. And some few small aunts, not wanted in the kitchen, nor anywhere else for that matter, sat on the very edges of the chairs, poised and brittle, afraid to break like faded cups and saucers. Not many these mornings trod the piling streets. An old man, always fawn bullard, yellow gloved, and at this time of the year with spats of snow, would take his constitutional to the white bowling green and back, as he would take it wet our fire on Christmas Day or Doomsday. Sometimes two hale young men with big pipes blazing, no overcoats and wind-blown scarves, would trudge unspeaking down to the forlorn sea to work up an appetite, to blow away the fumes, who knows, to walk into the waves, and nothing of them was left but two curling smoke clouds of their inextinguishable briars. Then I would slap dashing home, the gravy smell of the dinners and others, the bird smell, the brandy, the pudding, the mince coiling up to my nostrils, when out of a snow-clogged side lane would come a boy, the spit of myself, with a pink-tipped cigarette and a violet past, and of a black eye, cocky as a bullfinch, leering all to himself. I hated him on sight and sound, and would be about to put my dog whistle to my lips to blow him off the face of Christmas, when suddenly he, with a violet wink, put his whistle to his lips and blew so stridently, so high, so exquisitely loud, that gobbling faces, their cheek bulged with goose, would press against the tinseled windows and the whole length of the white echoing street. For dinner we had turkey and blazing pudding, and after dinner the uncles sat in front of the fire, loosened all buttons, put their large moist hands over their watch chains, groaned a little and slept. Mothers, aunts, and sisters scuttled to and fro, bearing tureens. Aunt Bessie, who had already been frightened twice by a clockwork mouse, whimpered at the sideboard and had some elderberry wine. The dog was sick. Auntie Dowsy had to have 3 aspirins, but Auntie Hannah, who liked pork, stood in the middle of the snowbound backyard, singing like a big-bosomed thrush. I would blow up balloons to see how big they would blow up to, and then, when they burst, which they all did, uncles jumped and rumbled. In the rich, heavy afternoon, the uncles breathing like dolphins and the snow descending, I would sit among festoons and Chinese lanterns and nibble dates and try to make the model man of war, following the instructions for little engineers, and produce what might be mistaken for a seagoing tram car. Or I would go out, my bright new boots squeaking, into the white world, onto the seaward hill, and call on Jim and Dan and Jack to pad through the still streets, leaving huge deep footprints on the hidden pavements. I bet Oh, sorry.
I bet people will think they've been hippos. There have been hippos.
What would you do if you saw a hippo coming down our street?
I'd go like this, bang! I'd throw him over the railings and roll him down the hill, and then I'd tickle him under the ear, and then I'd wag his tail.
What would you do if you saw 2 hippos? Iron flanked and bellowing, he hippos clanked and battered through the scudding snow towards us as we passed Mr. Daniel's house.
Let's post Mr. Daniel a snowball through his letterbox.
Let's write things in the snow.
Let's write, Mr. Daniel looks like a spaniel all over his lawn.
Or we walked on the white shore. Can the fishes see it snowing? The silent, one-clouded heavens drifted out to sea. Now we were snow-blind travelers lost on the North Hills with vast dew-lipped dogs with flasks around their necks, ambled and shumbled up to us, baying Excelsior. We returned home through the poor streets where only a few children fumbled with bare red fingers in the wheel-rutted snow and cat-called after us, their voices fading away as we trudged uphill into the cries of the dock birds and the hooting of ships out in the whirling bay. And then, at tea, the recovering uncles would be jolly, and an ice cake loomed in the center of the table like a marble grave. Auntie Hannah laced her tea with rum because it was only once a year. Bringing out the tall tales now, we told by the fire as the gaslight bubbled like a diver. Ghosts wooed like owls in the long nights when I dared not to look over my shoulder. Animals barked in the cubbyhole under the stairs where the gas meter ticked. And I remember we went on singing carols once when there wasn't the shaving of a moon to light the flying streets. And at the end of the long road was a drive that led to a large house. And we stumbled up the darkness of the drive that night. Each of us was afraid, each one holding a stone in his hand in case. And we were all of us too brave to say a word. The wind through the trees made noises as of old unpleasant, and maybe web-footed men wheezing in caves. We reached the black bulk of the house.
What shall we give them? Hark the herald?
No, Jack said. Good King Wenceslas, I'll count 3. 1, 2, 3, and we began to sing. Our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow, felt darkness around the house that occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, and the small, dry voice, like the voice of someone who had not spoken for a long time, joined our singing, a small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door, a small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house, and the front room was lovely. Balloons floated under the hot water bottle gulping gas. Everything was good again, and the shone over the town.
Perhaps it was a ghost,
Jim said. Perhaps it was trolls, Dan said, who was always reading.
Let's go and see if there's any jelly left,
Jack said, and we did that. Always on Christmas night, there was music, and uncles played the fiddle, and cousin sang Cherry Ripe, and another uncle sang Drake's Drum. It was very warm in the little house. Auntie Hannah, who had got up to the worst parsnip wine, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she said her heart was like a bird's nest. And then everyone laughed again. And then I went to bed, looking through my bedroom window out into the moonlight and the endless smoke-covered colored snow. I could see the lights of the windows of all the other houses on our hill and hear the music rising from them up the long, steady, falling night. I turned the gas down, I got into bed, and I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept.
I've never heard that story before.
I'm gonna have to post the video version because it like kind of expands on things and like
yeah, it's
got good music too.
It's a very cute story as well. You want to do your next story?
I have another story. It's short. And this is a Christmas story from Iceland. In Iceland, you have like these big rocks that, you know, like roads go around and people don't really want to move them because the mythology in Iceland is so strong. The idea is that if you move them, the elves and trolls will, you know, retaliate against you. So that's a little bit of a background for this story about trolls. And then often in folklore, a way to defeat a troll is to trap it in the sunlight. So you might be able to guess the way this story is going to go. So I will begin. This is the night troll. On a certain farm, whoever stayed at home to mind the house on Christmas Eve while the others were at evening prayer used to be found the next morning either dead or out of his mind. The servants there thought this was very bad, and few wanted to be the ones to stay home on Christmas Eve. On one occasion, a young girl offered to mind the farm, and the others were delighted and went off. The girl sat in the main room and sang to a child which she held in her arms. Sometime during the night, a strange creature came to the window and began to sing. Fair seems your hand to me, hard and rough mine must be, dilly dilly do. And then she sang in reply, without turning round, dirt did it never sleep, dirt did it never sweep, sleep little baby sleep, lully lully loo. And then the voice at the window sang, fair seem your eyes to me, hard and rough mine must be, dilly dilly do. But the girl sang in reply, evil they never saw, sleep baby sleep once more, lully lully loo. And the voice at the window sang, fair seem your feet to me, hard and rough mine must be, dilly dilly do. And the girl sang, dirt did they never crush, hush little baby hush, lully lully loo. And then finally the voice at the window sang, day in the east I see, hard and rough mine must be, dilly dilly do. And then the girl sang, stand there and turn to stone, so you'll do harm to none, lully lully loo. Then the uncanny creature vanished from the window. But in the morning, when the people came home, a huge stone had appeared in the path between the farm buildings, and it had stood there ever since. Then the girl spoke of what she had heard, but never once had she turned round, and it must have been a night troll that had come to the window.
Nice, very nice. Do you want me to do one, or do you want to be the one that goes last, or do you want me to?
I was thinking I could maybe go last. I'm going to do 'Twas the Night Before Christmas.
That sounds nice, because we'll probably need something a little more polite, because instead what I'm going to be reading from is, and I'm going to have to turn so you can see the pages. I've got a picture book. It's called Die Hard Christmas. There you go. So, A Die Hard Christmas. Perhaps some of you have seen the story. I have not seen the movie. However, I have seen it done as a reading, and it was quite fantastic. But it's, I suspect, not exactly like this one. So we're going to go ahead here. Okay. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and up in the tower, everyone was partying, except for one wallflower. John McLean missed his wife. Things weren't just the same since Holly had moved west and changed her last name. Can you see? Okay. A truck pulled up, and who should disembark but 14 men whose intentions were dark. They spoke not a word and unloaded big crates and cut the phone lines and locked all the gates. Carl swept the floor, shooting every guard dead, while visions of bearer bonds danced in his head. John took off his shoes, making fists with his toes. It actually worked. Well, what do you know? When out in the lobby, there arose such a clatter, he sprung to the door to see what was the matter. When what to his wondering eyes should appear, holy crap, there are terrorists here. John hid under the table where no one could see and watched Hans question Mr. Takagi. I'm going to count to 3. There will be no 4. Give me the codes to open the vault door. I don't know the codes, so go ahead and shoot. Okay, said Hans Gruber, and ruined Takagi's suit. It's a little bit rude, I'm afraid. John tried to pull the cops by pulling an alarm, but instead called the bad guys who tried to cause him harm. But John killed Tony, who had very small feet, and sent him to the terrorists as a Yuletide treat. He put a Santa hat on the German and, eyes all aglow, wrote, "Now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho." Carl was furious. Tony was his brother. He chased John across the roof, and they shot at each other. John was able to escape through a ventilator shaft, come out of the coast, he sighed, then we'll have a few laughs. At Nakatami Tower, Sergeant Powell appeared. He checked the whole lobby and saw nothing weird. He was pulling away, but didn't get far before Marco landed on the hood of his car. Powell drove away backwards, screaming in fright. "Welcome to the party, pal," John yelled with delight. There he is on the, yeah. More police arrived, the FBI and a SWAT team. Hans didn't mind, it was part of his scheme. More rapid than eagles, his henchmen they came, and they radioed and shouted, and he called them by name. Now Eddie, now James, now Franco, now Uli, on France, on Carl, hair long and unruly. They shot the SWAT tank with a missile to surface to air missile and knocked it away down like it was a thistle. Now John McClane was angry indeed. He blew up 2 terrorists and called them jerkweed. Ellis told Hans, "Bubby, I'm your white knight." Hans shot him dead, giving the hostages a fright. Hans went to go check on explosives fuse and saw that poor John wasn't wearing any shoes. John fled from Carl and Hans, but alas, he had to run barefoot over sharp broken glass. His feet, how they hurt, his soles, oh so bloody. John crawled to the bathroom and called his good buddy. John was weary and ready to throw in the towel until he got a pep talk from Sergeant Al Powell. Powell was a chubby and plump, a right jolly old cop, and he trusted the cowboy in the tattered tank top. But a reporter was probing into McClane's life and revealed that Holly was actually John's wife. Hans quickly flipped over the gold picture frame. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. McClane." Oh my. His clothes all tarnished with ashes and soot. John staggered to the roof, bloody and barefoot. The explosives were wired to the rooftop with care in hopes that the hostages soon would be there. John warned everyone the roof would soon blow as a chopper strafed him with high-powered ammo. Around his waist, he tied a fire hose tight, and screaming an oath, he jumped into the night. He dangled in the air and gritted his teeth while flames encircled the tower like a reef. There it is. Fiercely fighting his way back inside, John yelled out, "Hans!" who he was done trying to hide. He limped to the vault like an old man on crutches, only to find Holly in his filthy clutches. John dropped his gun, put his hands on his head. It seemed he and Holly would soon be dead. But with a secret gun taped to his back, John shot Hans in a surprise attack. Woo! Hans fell out the window, still holding Holly's arm, and slowly, deliberately raised his forearm. The tenacious villain held on by his nails till John hooked Holly's watch and said, "Happy trails." Bearer bonds fluttered like fresh fallen snow as Holly embraced her blood-spattered bow. So Merry Christmas to all, and be kind to one another, and most of all, yippee-ki-yay. Sorry, we gotta end this right here. All right, I'm done. Over to you. Keep it classy.
That was a very exciting rendition of "Twas the Night Before Christmas." So now I am going to read the traditional version by Clement C. Moore, and I will begin. You can get this on Hoopla, and there are like lots of different versions on Hoopla too. I think there's a movie version that goes along with Tommy DePaula's art, so I would definitely recommend doing that. 'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the luster of midday to objects below. When, what to my wondering eyes should appear, but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles, his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. I drew in my head and was turning around. Down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowlful of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but then went straight to work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and lay his finger aside his nose, and giving a nod up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night.
Awesome. I love that.
It's a classic.
Yeah, that's nice. Thank you.
All right, I think that's a good
I think
note to end on.
I think so. That was beautiful. I always love that one. So it's a favorite. Like the Child's Christmas in Wales. You know, this Christmas is always, you know, traditional things that you remember from when you were a child.
Yeah, there's some things you have to go back to. Thank you, everyone. Have a very Merry Christmas.